Yeah, I think that part of being cognizant of what we see is making the very first step of understanding that what we're receiving from what we see is far broader and richer than what we often think in the first instance. And people like Roland Barthes were very curious about that sort of thing, and I think part of visual literacy is unpacking how many cultural assumptions we may make, or assumptions about identity that might be influencing us in ways that we never even considered once. I think that somebody who's from, like in my case, like a suburban upper middle class existence, can go for a long, long time without ever even thinking about how much class might be influencing how we might see something as simple as different products on a supermarket shelf or different elements of a street scene. Because the fact that if it's however ubiquitous it is, however much it's part of every moment of my daily life, that's the degree to which it's invisible to me, right? It's only through contrast of experience that you start to see that part of what you're experiencing is mediated by all of these factors like privilege and identity. But that it only works when you have a contrast, when you have a change, when you have an experience that's different from what you grew up with. As long as you're steady, as long as you're experiencing the same thing, you're not going to see it. It's like the air. It's invisible to you because it doesn't change. So it's sort of a general argument for seeing with the help of variety, seeing with the help of different experiences, and seeing with the help of just the learning that's, I think, going on a lot right now at this cultural moment when people are beginning to be given very good reasons to consider expanding their worldview a little and going outside their comfort zone and that kind of thing. It changes how you see the world.
When you said power and visualization and power dynamics, the first thing that came to my mind was the tyranny of PowerPoint. Because I'll stand in front of a classroom of students and say, just because PowerPoint shows that font and that font size, it doesn't mean that it's effective for communicating your message to your audience. Here is some evidence, but it goes back to, if PowerPoint says it's right. And I know that's not what you intended, but that's what came to my mind first. And in my experience working with students and some of these notions is it doesn't even cross their minds yet. So in a class that I teach where they have to make a video of their results about their project and their and the graphs are a part of that. And so it's a way to open up some conversation, like when the group was looking at gender identity and gait movement patterns, walking movement patterns, and they did the cisgender men with pink bars. Like it didn't even cross their mind that pink and blue might have a message that actually was in total conflict with what they were talking about. So it just, I think it's important to bring that up. And again, that might not have been what you were talking about. But maybe more on point is this interesting new idea that's coming to the fore. I think art historians and archaeologists have been aware of this for a while, but the beautiful white marble sculptures were actually painted, in antiquity, and it just blows our minds. That's not beautiful because it's not white, and it's actually not even how they were originally created, apparently. So it's definitely worth bringing to students' consciousness.
Yeah, I mean, I would just amplify a little bit. It kind of goes back to when I was asking Scott about when you're trying to say something in a comic, but I don't know how to read that comic yet.
Yeah.
And so it's a great reminder, Maisie, right, that in visual literacy, it's yet another domain in which we're going to make assumptions about what our students can understand. And the dimensions of their ability to make sense of that are not just going to be about knowledge, but they're going to be about lived experience. And maybe even more so in a visual domain where you bring more, I'm making a claim that I'm sure you would disagree with, that you bring more of yourself to interpreting a picture than you might to interpreting text, that's probably an untrue thing, the wrong thing to say.
Yeah, it's Pandora's box, actually. I'm not really sure.
Roll that back.
That might be a whole other panel.
But, but especially where we're expecting our students to interpret something, I'll say, full stop, it's important that we try to figure out all the different ways all the different tools people bring to that task, and all the different experiences that bring to that task. It's a great reminder for us.
Actually, quick PS to that. One of the interesting things is when it's just words, we may be visualizing words based on our cultural context, our place in society. When we visualize it, we betray what assumptions we were making. You know, like if you know, just like the man arrived at the supermarket is a very neutral sounding phrase, but if you sit down to draw it, you're not just drawing a man. You know, you're gonna make assumptions about the man. It's like, oh, really? What is the man wearing? What does the man look like? You know, where does the man come from? It's like you have to commit certain specific assumptions that you might have been making silently in the privacy of your own mind. You externalize those when you visualize it, and then you can begin to interrogate that. It's like, oh, really? Is that how you're imagining? You know, that kind of thing. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, one thing we're encouraged to do when we think about, diversity and inclusion in our teaching, one of the very first steps is just look at your syllabus. Who's included and who's not present?
Yeah.
And I can think the same thing about the examples we give, right? So whether they're text or visual examples, you know, what are we showing, and what range of experience is represented there? It's usually just my own experience, and that's already I'm already up on the wrong foot.
Oh, sorry.
No, I'm just forming my question too. I mean, I think so. Think that through past the flat stage into the 3D stage, and thinking about how do we use these images to represent other experiences. And is there a role for empathy in there? And is it any different in a 3D space than it is in a flat space?
That's a nice question. You want me to start?
Yeah, please.
I haven't talked, so like. Well, I will try to connect all the ideas. So from the previous person over there, I think that talking about bringing vocabulary to the classroom and talking about Tofty, I think one thing I always talk about is the macro and micro readings, as I mentioned yesterday. And I think that's important because, you know, that example that you mentioned before about, am I showing this or am I showing that? And I was like thinking about the experience of drinking water. And if I can able to create that schema and what it means to drink water, like, you know, like the sensation or like the water going through my throat, and like, you know, how hard it is to hold so depending on that schema, I can select, you know, what's important to characterize the experience, and that's what I show. So that's related to that question. And related to your question, what came to my mind is the case of Facebook, no? Like how from now several years now, like we are conditioned about how we are supposed to look on social media, and selfies is a quick example of that. How we started creating this visual grammar about what's the right selfie. So remember those days in which you had, you know, the angle and you have to show your neck and like, you know, and stuff like that. And it's interesting because that goes to the, okay, what are the assumptions that, you know, like underlying this like photographic composition? And how it affects other people when you create something like that, right? Like where you take your selfie tells something about you and tells about like the power that you can exert on your friends, because if you take a crappy selfie, you're not like that credible, but if you take a selfie, you know, in the Bahamas, then you're like showing power to some sort. And connected to that, to the affective state, I think, and I agree with you, that just like the 3D diagram of the brain is not enough, because I think it's like that the missing component of like playing with the cadaver and like smelling and like feeling, you know, like the, you know, that you cannot like, it's not that pliable, you know. So I think in the case of 2D, and that's what I asked the question yesterday about delight, because my research focuses on delight as well, is like, what are the elements that are going to convey, you know, emotion I think that's a key question that we should consider when we create like 2D compositions. But based on this example of the brain and having some globes that are going, like to give you feedback, I guess that's the key part when you try to relate the affective, like component with the visual component. So in case of 3D, I guess just like mere 3D visualizations aren't enough and will be not effective as they are supposed to be to enrich the experience or create a memorable experience. So there should be something that, that we need to add, and the haptic response, I think, is part of it. But I'm looking forward to it.
We should probably, I don't know if everybody uses the term haptic in the audience, but the notion of some sort of force feedback or response so that you have some kind of tactile experience. A very quick question. I should point out that in speaking of the advantages of like rotating views of things like biological processes, especially things where you have a complex shape that's contained within another shape, and you need translucency to see it. I'm mostly comparing it to flatland, to drawings, to traditional diagrams. There, I think, is the great advantage. I wouldn't deny that in the absence of some kind of interaction or old-fashioned sticking your hands in it, that it suffers by comparison, only that we're closing the gap. And of course, you have to, we all have to recognize that there are times when it's just not practical to, you just don't have a corpse lying around, it's a practical thing.
Yeah. No, can I?
Might be an ethical and a
there is that too.
No, the only thing I wanted to add is that, I can see, for example, having this translucent layer image of our bodies is practical, but talking about like how images affect us, with my students, they're like so flooded of visual information. I'm pretty sure if I show up like with this, like translucent layered body, image of the body in 3D, they will not react. Maybe I will because, I was that kid that no VR, no AR. It was diagrams on a page. So when I saw it for the first time, I was like, wow. So I think there's something in how much visual information we have nowadays that we think that everything, as you said, like we keep seeing the same things over and over and over again, that we become less critical about how that thing was created and how it's affecting our visual culture and how it affects our perception of reality.